Take on me. Take on. Oh, sorry. Where are we? What universe are we in? Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Escaping Dystopia. I'm your host. My name is Wah. It's been a little while since we've spoken. A little over a month. Apologies for that, life and all whatnot. Tonight's show, April 3rd, 2019, episode 79, Feeling the Creeping Dystopia. This show is, in fact, called Escaping Dystopia. So, the Creeping Dystopia is part of what we'll talk about. As is kind of what we're going to try and figure out as our format here. We're going to go through our straight news here with the funny filter. And then we'll come back and talk a little bit about some of the more important stuff, including our Spaceship Earth discussion for the evening. So we'll skip over that for the moment, and we'll get right to it. The Mueller Report has been completed. The Mueller Report has not been released. What we've seen so far is the Barr summary. The latest on this, we're expecting a redacted report for the Mueller Report to come out sometime in the next week and a half or so. There was reporting today indicating that some of the investigators were a bit perplexed by the summary that Barr had written, and in fact found that there was a little bit more damaging information about the president. It was mentioned previously by Rosenstein as well as Barr that without any crimes that they were indicated, they would protect anybody who was discussed. So we'll see how far these redactions go. I think our media, of course, did a pretty poor job covering this report. Roy, that's opinion. Save it. All right, so the border emergency update. There are more stories coming out of the border. We saw some more pictures recently of tents under bridges where it looks like they have reduced the amount of people that they're allowing to claim asylum on a given day, so they're making everybody wait. Now they're trying to force Mexico to agree to process or allow those people to wait on their side of the border while we wait for court hearings, which are never going to come. We'll talk a little bit more about this the other day, but the president has this week, I guess I should mention, he threatened to shut down the border. This is something he's done a number of times in the past. This is not the first time that he has done that. He appears to have backed off that by this point in the week. He has also cut off foreign aid to 3 other Mexicos in Central America. This is where he's blaming them for organizing the caravans. There is no evidence that the governments there at all organizing this. The people of those countries are, but I don't think you can necessarily cut off aid to the government because of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. In the last month, the Supreme Court has ruled that anybody who has broken a law can be detained indefinitely once they've had a deportation order. This is one of the things where they've been going back 10, 20 years to find domestic violence and using those kind of things to deport people. And so the Supreme Court has essentially okayed that. This is one of those things that the longer this continues and they keep pushing for this, they're going to get more things that they're able to do. We've also closed our international immigration offices. This was one of those stories that kind of gets lost in the chaos that is the president. But this is where people who are trying to immigrate to the United States could, in fact, weird hands, man. Could, in fact, have work with an agent who was specifically designed to help them do that. We used to have offices all around the world. Those have been closed. We detained a 9-year-old girl for a day this last month. She was on her way to school. They picked her up and didn't believe her when she showed her ID. She's an American citizen. That's what's happening so far. These are just the facts, like I said. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. The Republicans are trying to push for an abortion banning bill. I'm going to do a different video about this because this speaks directly to the experience that my family has had. Now is not the time to do it, and I definitely don't want to do it live. But I want to build this and have this out so I can reply to folks, because the misinformation about what they're trying to do here to force small government into operating rooms during an extremely sensitive time for a family is abhorrent. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Oranges. The president this week, the president of the United States, had severe difficulty pronouncing the word origins. He was trying to talk about the beginnings of the Mueller investigation to cast aspersions across the entire thing. He's now pivoted again to trying to discredit it, but also using it that it has exonerated him. It specifically said that he was not exonerated, so he specifically came out and claimed to have been exonerated. Sorry, I guess from the if you're watching this from the historical record, this is quite a bit of a jump, because over the last few weeks after the report came out and has been ingested, it's been very interesting, because we haven't seen the report. We've only seen a summary from the Attorney General, who we know was actually picked because he'd written an op-ed about how he didn't think the investigation was legit because he didn't think the president could obstruct justice, and then that's what he wrote in his summary. So again, we're still kind of a little bit on edge for that what the hell happened kind of thing. But anyway, oranges. So 3 times he tried to say this word and couldn't, and he said oranges instead of origins. In this same speech, he and there's a little bit of debate, but I'm not sure that it matters, that if he either couldn't remember where his father was born, or lied about where his father was born, or, and this is the third possibility, because he claimed his father was born in Germany. The records show that his father was born in New York. This is the thing, though. Shortly after coming to the United States. So what he might be doing is, again, part of the sundowning thing is you start to reveal secrets that, are huge and big in your brain because you've never been able to tell anybody. Like maybe his dad was actually born in Germany and came as a baby, and then they claimed that he was born in the U.S. so he could be a U.S. citizen. Wouldn't that be hilarious if that was what that whole thing was about? I don't think, and this is one of the things that's been wildly frustrating about this whole thing, is we never get answers, right? We never get somebody who gets to pin him down and be like, what are you talking about? And that's one of the things that's gone over this. And we'll talk about the CPAC challenge on the second run through. The president also claimed that the sound from wind turbines causes cancer this last week, and I'm not making this up, this is a fact. He said this. For our This Week in Fascism sentence, today Mitch McConnell passed rules in the United States Senate that allow the confirmation of presidential appointees, as well as, I believe, all district court judges, to be approved with a bare majority, with no, you don't need 60 votes for filibuster, and also cut down the time for allowing debate on these from what had been 30 hours down to 2 hours. These are things that in the past the minority party had used to slow down the power of the presidential party and the executive. These are ways that, you would have the checks and balances of the country, and so you had checks and balances within institutions themselves, and today one of those was blown up. The reason why these are called nuclear options is the idea that A, you're completely destroying something that had been there for a long time, much like a nuclear weapon that were to hit a landmark, a historic landmark, would completely obliterate it from the face of the earth. And also, there's fallout, right? There's continued fallout from these actions. So McConnell's making the bet that Republicans won't lose the Senate ever. And given the kind of the oddly gerrymandered way that the country is set up right now, where the Republicans were able to get control of the Senate with way less votes, and if you look at this, it's actually pretty stark. The average number of votes that a Republican senator gets versus the average number of votes a Democratic senator has to get, because of all of our large states tend to send the more Democratic members. Although, yeah, Cruz did beat Beto by a couple points. So, Anyway, Texas is still fully red on that side. Anyway, but even with Texas, the average population per senator for Republicans is wildly lower than Democrats. I've done this analysis. I did it a few years back when I was unemployed. I do similar things for a living. And, it's been pretty stark. And I don't think that's going to change, right? All these little, as they call them, the flyover states, or these smaller, less populous states that people tend to want to escape from so they can go to, these other cool places that they've heard about their whole lives, which tend to be in blue states. The McCain Attacks. So over the last month, the president did something that really confused a lot of people. And this really goes into the mental decline, if you will, because it doesn't make any sense to attack a dead war hero at all, even if you had a personal feud with that person. And he kept doing it just out of the blue, really kind of strangely. And I think it was one of those things, and this was during the last, when the Mueller Report, there was the question on what was going to happen and whether it was going to come out, and he was really freaking out. And so I think he was blaming McCain because McCain had originally engaged the folks to do the dossier, as they call. And so he was attacking John McCain repeatedly over the last few weeks. People talk about this a little bit, about he lowers the bar a lot where they do this continually, lowers the bar. And I just want to, people need to understand where we're at. We're at the bottom. We're scraping along the bottom. And we're gonna bounce on the bottom, but we're stuck on the bottom. The bar can't be lower. It's and then you say, oh well, he did that. That's lower. And then I'll be like, no, I'll bring up something that he did 3 months ago. And you're like, that was actually probably worse. It's been the attacks, really, literally, using the office of the president to disparage a fallen veteran. Just a few months after he had passed, someone who'd served the United States both in combat as a prisoner of war, that is a senator for a generation. While that's been going on, there's also, and this is part of, again, the fallout from the Democratic Party taking over the House of Representatives, there is a security clearance now investigation, because apparently the president had been overriding the security apparatus, the deep state, or the people who work for a living for the government, as they had noticed and red flagged a number of people who were working in the White House who probably should be like, I don't know that you should be setting foreign policy since you have all these foreign ties that you didn't tell us about when you joined up. No, let him in there. He can do the foreign policy he's got it on his phone. It's WhatsApp, I think. So they did that. And then officially today, we've seen the request for the president's tax returns coming out from one of the congressional committees. I'm not sure exactly which one. I think it might be the Ways and Means. And so there's going to be some question on, because now that the president's been in there for a year and he hasn't released these returns, there's that literal question of how the degree to which his personal influence is affecting policy decisions, his personal finances. And that becomes really directly the role of what the Constitution lays out as Congress's role in that kind of stuff. Alrighty, so now let's get this thing off of here. Oh no, we're stuck again. There we go. Alright, so going back. So there was this other thing I wanted to talk about. And this is I'm going to try this way. We'll see if it works out. I don't know. People got to tell me if things don't work or if they do work. Because I'm just talking. Because, got to talk about this stuff. The Spaceship Earth for the week. So I was going to read a little bit. This is from a New York Times piece. The Spaceship Earth, for those of you who aren't aware with that allegory, it's kind of a long-term project of mine to build a concept for a moral framework that's not built upon this divine assumptions of supernatural beings, but built more on the fact that our species is here, has evolved on this planet, and this planet is largely our spaceship through which we're traveling through the cosmos. So, Spaceship Earth. One of the things we're going to talk about tonight is allergies and vaccinations. See, we've reached a really interesting place as a species where we have, conquered so much of the world. We've explored the whole world, right? We've got satellites that are going around, and actually some people just blew up a satellite this last week, which is going to cause some issues. But so we've explored the whole world, and we're putting robots on other planets. We're sending rockets to other places. And, over that time, we've created this environment around ourselves where we've, sterilized it in a great degree. We've, conquered that hunger thing. We've conquered, that, and this is not for everyone. And this is, I'm very much speaking from my experiences here. And that actually goes in directly to what I'm talking about for this topic, and the experiences of first world, more wealthy people who live on this planet. And this is kind of one of the, it's not the downsides to it per se, but it is kind of the, well, I'll explain. Let me read. The author of this study looked at the prevalence of hay fever among 17,414 children born in March 1958. Of 16 variables the scientists explored, he described as most striking an association between the likelihood that a child would get hay fever allergy and the number of his or her siblings. It was an inverse relationship, meaning the more siblings the child had, the less likely that he or she would get an allergy. And not just that, but the children least likely to get allergies were the ones who had older siblings. The paper hypothesized that, quote, allergic diseases were prevented by infection in early childhood, transmitted by unhygienic contact with older siblings, or acquired prenatally from a mother infected by contact with her older children. Over the past century, declining family size, improvements in household amenities, and higher standards of personal cleanliness have reduced the opportunities for cross-infection in young families, the paper continues. This may have resulted in more widespread clinical expression of atopic disease emerging in wealthier people, as seemed to have occurred for hay fever. And then it goes on, it says, what does the immune system do when it's not properly trained? And that's, it can overreact. It becomes aggrieved by things like dust mites or pollen. It develops what we call allergies, chronic immune system attacks, inflammation, in a way that is counterproductive and can be even dangerous, right? Because people have these allergic reactions. So that's where we're at, right? So we've done so well. We have these bodies and these immune systems that evolved on this planet dealing with who knows what and ridiculous things for, millions of years before we got to a species very close to us. And then, 50,000, 100,000 years in our current main form, right? Where we still have these immune systems. And then over the last 100, we've really, really changed our environment, so much so that we're seeing these kind of chronic conditions pop up in a large portion of the populace. And there was, in this article, it mentions about 13% of people, of kids have eczema or some other skin condition. Now, I will say in full disclosure, I actually do have one of these same kind of things, and it actually is caused by my immune system attacking my body because it doesn't have anything else to do. And so a lot of these medications, and you'll actually see advertisements for these all the time, because this is a billion dollar industry, because this is huge. We're paying tons of money as a country for this, the biologics. And you'll see in what they do, and I've discussed this with my doctor over time, is they try to turn off various aspects of the immune system, because a lot of this is caused, a lot of the issues are caused by inflammation, which is where the body is, the inflammation, you got blood going there to try and fix or fight or whatever is going on. That's, activity, that inflammation, and that stuff is going on. And when you have chronic inflammation, that's one of the things that leads to all sorts of every other problem. It's, you always have a problem in this particular place. So these kind of things are, very rooted in a lot of medical issues that we're seeing now, caused now by this environment that is so sterile for us. And that is one of the things that I think we need to keep aware of as we're moving forward, and find some way to balance that out. There's the whole, we saw actually this last week, a couple weeks ago, the governor in Kentucky having the pox party for his kids. And this is actually something that I was exposed to as a concept when I was younger, because the chickenpox vaccine actually came out in 1995. And apparently, my understanding now is that the chickenpox vaccine actually protects you from getting shingles later in life, which is one of the side effects for having experienced the chickenpox vaccine. But the idea with chickenpox, once you've had it, you're not going to get it again. but you could get shingles. So the natural exposure, even in this case, is not as effective as the vaccination. Even with that, though, there's, we have our consumer products. This is a whole nother show I should probably do on this, but selling cleanliness and hygiene to families, and especially, and this was actually a big part of our mass media, and we have a whole genre of media that's dedicated to this concept. And we actually have the word in the name of them, if you'll recall, soap operas. Because they were, shows, operas, dramas meant to sell soap. And they worked very, very effectively for people who were at home during the day watching them selling soap in between the steamy bits. All right, so going back through all the factual stuff, we talked about the Mueller Report, right? We'll see. The president really flip-flopped kind of mightily on this one. Going, before it was released, totally release it just like with his tax returns. And then once it came out, you guys have seen what you need to see, which we haven't seen really anything at all. I don't think there's actually a full sentence, from the 300-page report used in the summary. And there will be some pretty epic legal fights, I think, coming up over the next 6 months, a year. To get this out. And eventually somebody's going to leak it and he's going to freak out. And then, we'll see what happens next. There's been two attempts. There was a bill that was passed by the House to call on the Justice Department to release the report in its entirety. It passed the House unanimously. The Senate then can take up those bills, but it goes by unanimous consent, and so anybody can stop it, and that's happened twice so far by Republicans doing that. So their claims that they want this out is they don't want this out. And one of the reasons why that they don't, this has been one of the difficulties about this whole situation, going back to Obama noticing that this stuff was going on, and McConnell refusing to go public with the fact that we knew that the Russians were messing with the election, and McConnell's justification being, we're not going to go tell the American people that the Russians want our guy to win. And that's the thing. They won't admit that the Russians worked to get Trump elected. And that's been going on this whole time, where even when they admit, like Nielsen did it, the Secretary of Homeland Security would admit that Russians were messing with our democracy, but not that they had an intent. And that's one of the things that we'll see, I think, very, very clearly with a full Mueller report. Now, whether or not Barr is going to let that come out is a question, because, again, he doesn't want to let any harm to come to anybody who's not been charged with crimes, and the Republican, as a party, have not been charged with crimes, so something that would make them look horrid would fall under that jurisdiction. So that's been the kind of that cognitive dissonance area where Republicans have been for a long time, and getting them to admit that that's why the Russians expose themselves and open themselves up to repercussions for meddling was because they saw an opportunity. And what was that opportunity? Trump in that office. Oranges! Right? So about the border, more stuff. Those stories are coming out where they've just lost more families, and they're doing the same stuff now, and they just keep shifting it. They're trying to, hold families the whole time, get the Flores Amendment thrown out. They've got basically all their shelters now are at capacity. This is why they're claiming there's a crisis, right? Because they changed the rules. They're not processing people, and they're not, trying to get new judges. In fact, the president said we don't need any judges this week. And so they're trying to create a bigger crisis and then use that bigger crisis as a justification for both an emergency and the law changes that they're trying to get. Which, it's just not, Pelosi is not going to go for this at all. And so it's going to be investigations and BS. That's just what's going on for a little while. Fox, and they also cut off aid to 3 Central American countries where, again, he's blaming them for the caravans, but it doesn't, again, make any sense that you would cut off aid to countries make their situations worse there, and somehow that's going to cause those people who are fleeing really bad situations to stay. And it's just, the incentive isn't quite there. And I understand the idea, well, we're going to cut it off because they're not doing anything now. But that's not the case either. And this is all built, again, to me, this all looks like pretty clear white supremacy from a ideological standpoint of what ties all of these things together. Yeah, the SCOTUS ruling on indefinite detention is disturbing. And again, we'll see what some of these investigations come out. It's only been a few months since the Dems have had any power, so let's like I said, we closed our international offices, and they did. They picked up. There's been a number of American citizens that they've picked up and hassled and stuff going on. The Oranges stuff, I really do think he's deteriorating mentally. I haven't seen him. You know, it's tough because you don't ever see him actually explain anything. It's all this bombastic stuff and just this very, very limited vocabulary of good, bad, horrible, great, best ever. There's no ever explanation for it. I do think you can take to Republicans and folks who think about voting for this guy and have him do the CPAC challenge. He gave over the last couple weeks this speech at CPAC, which is this conservative activist gathering, like 2 hours long, and it spawned, and every time he does this, it spawns like just days and days of these news articles that quote like one ridiculous thing he said, like, oh, he said this racist stuff, or oh, he lied about this, oh, he lied about this again, or he lied about that and that again, and each one is its own story. And the story here again is like, this guy's really pretty unhinged and doesn't really have a good grasp on any of the topics that are facing the country. I still think the press needs to ask like very basic questions of the president, like what is a pre-existing condition, and what does it mean that Republicans support it? He had this whole healthcare thing where he was like, "Oh, we're going to do this for healthcare bill. We're going to pass before the elections. It'll be the greatest thing ever. Cheaper, better, awesome." And then all the Republicans were like, we kind of remember this, so we're going to let you lead on this. The next day, he was like, yeah, so right after this next election, we win big. I'm going to show you the plan. We'll vote on it. Boom, done. And I think it's wearing pretty thin. I mean, the faithful, his faithful don't pay attention to him, per se. They like the libs being owned and all that. And whatever. So, like, his ridiculousness is not really something that they pay that much attention to. Mitch McConnell and the nuclear option. Yeah, they did it today. So they're going to start packing the courts real fast. There's like 130 openings. The thing that's gross about this, Mitch McConnell actually wrote an op-ed on April 1st, April Fool's Day, where he was complaining about the Democrats' obstructionism. And this is the same guy who refused to meet with a Supreme Court nominee nominated by Obama during his last year in office. So I mean, the level of hypocrisy from these guys is notable, even still. Right? Even still, they're ramping it up, and so they use that hypocrisy as justification for this nuclear option to force through and fill these large amount of openings, many of them created by the Republicans' own actual obstruction against Obama nominees. Good work if you can get it, but man, just so evil. Yeah, the McCain attacks, he finally stopped doing it. That was really pretty disgusting. On the security clearance, probably just like it's standard, like just out of control Republican hypocrisy, right? What are you going to do? They freak out about her emails for 7 years, and now pretty much everybody in there has their own phones doing whatever. The president's got an unsecured phone. They just picked up this lady at Mar-a-Lago this last week with like 4 cell phones, a couple thumb drives with some hacking stuff on it, and a laptop, and she's like, what? I just gotta go swimming. I don't speak English. What? Yeah. So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's going to take investigations, but you're going to see hardcore stonewalling now. And we'll see how this is going to play out in the courts. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. And the official request for the tax returns went out, like I said. This is going to be court battles up the yin-yang for the next little while. And we'll see what leaks out, what comes out. I'm still interested to see what Mueller found. Because I think, and I'm still of the opinion that we had, if we didn't have active collusion, we just had a useful idiot situation. Where, again, we're going to see why the Russians wanted him and how, to the degree that Mueller found that he was compromised or at least manipulatable by foreign entities. And I think there's going to be some stuff that's going to make them look extremely bad, including the Republicans. And I think that's why you're going to see such a big fight over ever having this information come out. And the hypocrisy, yeah, off the charts, as always. Anyway, good to be back doing a show. Thanks for everybody who stopped by. We'll see the next time as we ramp up. We'll talk a little bit more about some Democratic candidates and their stuff that's going on. There's not much, really, with that's happening yet. Joe Biden likes to touch people. I don't know what else is new on that front. We'll talk about that a little bit more. That's again a whole show by itself. So anyway, thanks for anybody who stopped by, and peace out, and I hope you guys enjoy your ride on Spaceship Earth.